Well, yet another evening, yet another Talamanca review, and I must confess that this is one of my favorite parts of the day where I just sit down and reflect and be inspired and try my very best to say things worthy of being heard and worthy of being recorded, which is not always easy and highly unpredictable. Now, I said some time ago, 3 or 4 days ago, that I was going to do a podcast on love, and I think I'm going to do that tonight. And however, if you think it's going to be uplifting, I think you're going to be disappointed. Well, I guess the best place to begin is a definition of what love is. Now, love is, to my opinion, to my sensibilities, to my experience, and to my perspective, it is a state of being simply a state of being. And is a state of being where we feel as though we are in the right place at the right time. When you talk about this spiritual concept of being here and now, it's impossible to be here and now unless there's love. Love is the here and now energy. It is the being energy. Yesterday and tomorrow, the moment before this one and the moment after this one, are a complete and total waste of time. All that matters is this moment that we're occupying. Now, let's be honest, most of us associate love with biology and romance. And there's a component to love that is biological and romantic, and it has to do with procreating. And procreating and having a son is one of, if not the most magical thing I've done in my life. I can still so clearly remember the day at the hospital in South Mississauga. Well, not that south, it's on here, Ontario. But the main hospital in Mississauga. My son's mother was taken away and anesthetized. My son was a breech birth. He was being strangled by his umbilical cord. And so a cesarean section was required. And for those of you who have undergone an unplanned and an unscheduled C-section as a modality of the delivery of your child, and here I'm speaking to the men, it's a harrowing experience because you don't know what's going on. And this, of course, was my first and my only child. And so I remember it. I remember getting a Tim Hortons coffee. I remember going out in front of the hospital and smoking a cigarette or two and pacing. You ever notice how when you have a nervous energy in you that the body needs to do things, right? By the way, this is probably why beads were invented in religious tradition, to sort of provide an innocuous way to dissipate that nervous tension inside of you. You just keep the beads going. And I would point out that it is a universal religious and spiritual practice, the counting of beads, or allowing each bead to represent a prayer. And that's also in and of itself interesting, how so much of what we do in the form of spiritual practice, looked upon from an intellectual perspective, is nonsensical. It is the repetition of something positive, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, that sort of thing. And you just keep repeating it. And there's something about that repetition that calms us and abates the encroachment of this negative energy. And negative energy can come from any number of sources. It can come from us by investing in something which is a risky expectation or outcome. It can come from other people, and it can come from entities. But it's very interesting how the whole thing works. So I remember feeling a sense of love like I've never felt in my life when my son was born. I have felt it, similar kinds of love and mystical experience in I guess you could say, altered states of consciousness brought on by, well, I shouldn't say altered, because I'm fully aware of the fact that I'm a physical being incarnate, but heightened states of awareness in which a tremendous sense of love and presence comes in. This has been, that's what got me into meditation. When I first started doing it, I started having these rather extraordinary experiences. And they've continued all my life. What they didn't tell me at the beginning of Path was that you would get more and more responsibility as your consciousness unfolded. And responsibility in the spiritual realm, while incarnate, it has no remuneration. It has no pension plan, and it has no benefits other than the spiritual benefits. So that sense of being, I went back into the hospital, and I was walking around in the neonatal ward, and a nurse saw me. My eyes were red and watered because I had been crying, because my son's mother was taken away for an unplanned C-section. And so it was an extraordinary experience. So that was certainly a sense of unbelievable being, the birth of a child. I just couldn't believe it. I was almost in shock for like a week after my son was born. Magical time. And but again, we're talking about love, and we're talking about what love is, and trying to get a handle on it. I've always admired people who have in some way, shape, or form mastered love. I would say that a number of my spiritual teachers that I have known throughout my life have mastered love, and mastered, more importantly, divine love. There's really only one love, but from its source, which is the creator, that is the most powerful distillation of it. There's nothing really that comes close. And it's a very important experience to have because it sets the baseline by which you can calibrate all other pseudo mystical energies around you. Okay, now when I say love in a spiritual sense, I mean a saint. Okay, and saints exist, they're alive today, and they're very special people to be around. There's a kind of a psychic fragrance to them, like a flower has a fragrance. And there's a love and well-being and an absence of thought, an absence of worry, which again is going back to what love is. And once you get that imprinted on you, and I was lucky to get it imprinted fairly early in some of the teachers and instructors I had in my early exposure to meditation and group meditation. I remember there's this one lady in her 80s I meditated with, and she had been practicing her whole life, and this was about 1982, I guess. Was it 83? Yeah, 83. And I literally heard like 1,000 violins playing in concert when I meditated with this woman. I heard it inside me. And I later found out that that is, in fact, one of the celestial sounds up around the seventh dimension. And she had passed it to the rest of us in the group. And when I came out of the meditation, the whole front of my shirt was soaked. I had been crying. And I was so lost inside this energy of intense love, expressed through the 1,000 violins, that I didn't even know I had been crying. It's like I was in a trance, right? A divine trance. And then as you go through your life, you, at least me anyways, on my journey as, and I think really my journey is about documentation. And I know that sounds bland, you know. Hey, what's your mission? What's your spiritual mission? I'm a healer. What's your spiritual mission? I'm a seer. What's your spiritual mission? I'm a saint. I'm meant to support other people and give them a sense of the divine energy. All great and noble unfoldments of the divine nature and a human mission. And they come to me and what's your mission? Documentation. I do the same thing for a living that I do spiritually. Okay, so A Devil in Us is a form of documentation. It captures a time and a place in the human history. So does Stardust Ranch, so does The Light of Darkness. It's documentation, okay? Important documentation, but documentation nonetheless. And as we used to say in the software world, documentation is the bastard offspring of quality assurance. It's the lowest rung in a software development environment. They treated us fairly well, though. No complaints. So love can also take the form of a commitment, right? I'd say committing to defend a country if the fight is just, especially if you've been invaded. I would say that that in fact is a form of love. Um, Working towards the betterment of people through a focused discipline like healing and having the patience to just continue to do it. If you get to know some really good healers, and I've been fortunate to know some really good healers, um, they all have this quality, and that is that an unwavering commitment to people and a great desire to alleviate the suffering of people, the pain of people. Very beautiful. Very beautiful. And now we come to love as a creative or a generative force. So there's like love is everything, but the energy of love goes off and does everything. And so it's love that makes a tree grow. It's the love of the creator as it comes down through the various dimensions. There's nothing really scientific about it. And I guess you could say what I'm doing tonight is giving you the corollary, the bookend to the spiritual pornography podcasts about how rather than separate things in a subject-object paradigm, love closes that distance and lives in the moment. So there's no moment before, there's no moment after, there's no them, there's no you. There's only the task at hand guided by love. Very beautiful when you start to understand these things. And I'm very glad that these things have been given to me in my life, because I don't know how people get by in life without this knowledge. I really don't. Sometimes I just look at people and I go, what would it be like to be them? Like, what would it like, what's going on inside that person's head, you know? And very often the answer is not that good. And so I stopped asking that question a long time ago, because my powers of awakened imagination are such that if I think about it too much, I will go inside the other person's head and then immediately regret it. So I think for me, the hardest form, for one of the reasons that I became so focused on the pursuit of divine love and divine knowledge was because everything human in my life was a hand grenade. My mother was crazy. My father was psychotic. Um, just like really bad people who did really bad things. Now, when I say bad people who did bad things, I'm not talking about criminals. Most of the bad people I know who do bad things are titled people. Titled doctor, nurse, president, prime minister, minister of agriculture, barrister, queen's counsel, lawyer, judge, surgeon, chief surgeon. The really bad people in this world are titled folks. I hate to tell you this. And this goes all the way into the criminal organizations. Okay? I mean, they do horrible things, no doubt. Cartel has become satanic. They do rituals. They use black magicians. They use Palamayombe. They use Santeria. They use voodoo. They use everything at their disposal. I'm not here to defend them or to suggest for a moment that they're good, but I am not stepping back from the assertion that the very worst people I've met in my life have all been titled and fit comfortably into society and live with the admiration, respect, and adulation of the peons around them. Okay? Now, it takes a special kind of sight to see this absence of love. Now, the chief thing that robs us of love and robs us of our centeredness in the modern world are, if it's not us, okay, because a lot of people will sabotage themselves, but that's very often a trauma they carry over from bad parenting, bad genetics, epigenetic trauma, and ancestral trauma. I mean, you start to get into 2, 3, 4 generations of addiction. You're going to have a really, really bad bloodline, all right? Because it just settles in there. And then the kids are born cursed, okay? They're born cursed. Um, I would say that I was born into a cursed family. There's absolutely no doubt about it in my mind, but my brother and sister would probably disagree with me because they're not aware of it, you know? So how is it that this whole world is going on around us and only 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 people can see it? Well, because the other 999 or 9,999 are asleep. Okay, they have not woken up. You don't begin to get a handle on what truth is until you know what love is, because love is the foundation of truth. If something is not rooted in real love, there's no truth in it. And this was one of the realizations that formed the framework for The Light of Darkness, A Warrior's Tale for Our Time. Okay? Well, before we get into that and what institutions have done to the notion of love, okay, I will begin by, you know, talking a little bit about my early experiences with love. Um, I didn't feel any love from my parents, which is why I wanted to leave the house at 4 years old. And I was the only one of 3 kids who felt this love deprivation. I don't know why that is. I mean, I could speculate, but I'm not going to do it on air, and to be recorded. But, you know, there just wasn't a lot of love there. And I don't think my parents had any love. I asked my mom once when I was in my 20s, like, why did you even have kids? And she said, because everybody was doing it. It's what people did. It's like, on the one hand, I applaud her for her honesty. But on the other hand, like, oh my God, woman. Well, what a depraved answer, right? My mother and father were perfect representations of the mid 20th century, the kind of depravity that governed people. And it was a casual depravity. And like I said, look, there were no, other than my father chain smoking 3.5 packs of filterless cigarettes a day until his mid 40s. I mean, there was no alcohol in my family. There were no prescription drugs. Um, my parents weren't hippies. They didn't smoke weed. They went to Catholic Mass every Sunday. My father went to a minimum of 3 AA meetings a week. And my mother was up to her neck in Al-Anon, which is the um, corollary association to Alcoholics Anonymous for the family members of alcoholics. And it spins off into Alateen. And if you don't go into that when you're young, if you decide you're a little bit, for lack of a better way of saying it, fucked in the head when you're older, many people who came from alcoholic homes end up going to adult children of alcoholics. And it's a free group therapy where you just, you've all seen it in movies. Fight Club has some great therapy scenes, because um, that Marla woman and the I can't remember the actor's name, but the guy who plays the alter ego to Brad Pitt, they meet at these therapy groups. They're both addicted to therapy. 12-step is another way of saying it. So I found myself asking at a later age, well, why was there such an absence of love in the family if there was nothing really demonstrably bad going on in the family? No drug addiction, no alcoholism, practicing alcoholism, no infidelity, none of that stuff, right? And the only way I can answer it, it was in the DNA of my parents. They had this anti-love DNA. And so my family was very perfunctory. It had an almost military air to it, you know, structure, expectation, severe punishments. It was a physical family. You could get punched in the face in my family, and that was considered normal, right? And there I was growing up, and I just could not get any love. And then I started to look for love in all. What happens is if you want love and unconsciously you know love exists, but you can't find it in your immediate surroundings, you will become a seeker. You will become like Gautama Siddhartha in Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. You will become a seeker. You will begin to explore things, turn over stones. You'll begin to listen to music. You'll begin to read books. You'll begin to look and look and look and look because you feel as though something's missing. And so you keep looking for that missing thing. And so this is one of the ways in which I developed as a human being. I became literate and read and eventually studied poetry and literature and music. I never got into painting or sculpture. It just seemed too far out. But I was very comfortable in language-based things. And I would get this sense secondhand of love. I would get it in books, you know? I would just get this incredible sense of love. And it was confirmation for me that this thing called love actually existed and that it was worth pursuing. Now, unfortunately for me, when you're raised in a family like mine, you will grow up with certain deficiencies in the expression of love with other human beings. It is a very rare thing for a human being to be able to express love beyond the love that they learned. Okay? It's a very difficult thing for a human being to learn to express love beyond the love that they have learned. And we learn love basically in the first 5 years of our lives. That's where you learn it. And then I guess you could probably carry that out to 13, which would be the bar mitzvah age in Judaism. And a lot of cultures don't have a lot of love in them. There's not a lot of love in Catholic culture. There's not a lot of love in Jewish culture. Catholic and Jews are very similar in the early 21st century. Both basically pivot all of their religion around blood. And with the Jews, it's the resurrection of the temple and the rituals therein. And with the Christians, and especially the Catholics, it's the blood of a single human being. Right? But it's blood, 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 blood. Blood rituals everywhere, blood. And love is just something very, in my experience, the people who love the best are the simplest of people, the most uneducated, the people who haven't been taught or beaten back down by a highly disciplined and structured society like Catholicism or like Judaism. And they haven't been told that, oh, that's sentimental nonsense. You need to focus on this, 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 and this. And you kind of get this desire to live within love beaten out of you. And you're convinced that life is a series of endless duties. And that if all of those duties are accomplished in a meaningful way and a complete way, then when one day you might feel this magical thing called love. Well, it didn't work for me. I never felt it. I didn't start to really feel it until I started to write at 19. I felt it in meditation, and then once I felt it, I had to express it. Okay? Very interesting, as I just do this podcast today and it spills out of me, as they all do, without any pre-planning, without any notes or anything. But as I think about it now, some of the writers that I've really admired over the years, um, like let's take, for instance, the Polish-American writer Charles Bukowski, who was an outrageous alcoholic and pretty much lived on Skid Row most of his life in Los Angeles. He started to make a bit of money toward the end of his life, but um, he became a master at documenting the absence of things. If you've ever read a Charles Bukowski book, or maybe you've seen the movie done about he wrote the movie and then it was done by, I think Babette Schroeder was the director, but he wrote the screenplay and it was called Barfly. And Mickey Rourke, of all people, plays Charles Bukowski. And Faye Dunaway's in it too. If you ever get a chance to see that movie, give it a watch. It's worth seeing. And Bukowski just sort of documents just how vapid the modern world is. And he's capturing mainly, like, I'd say the 70s. And to a lesser extent, the 80s is what he's capturing. And through his writing, he could make people feel deep and intense things, as so many writers can. But when you go and you meet those writers, they don't have that energy in their lives. They write about it so well because they're looking for it and they want it, but they can't quite seem to manifest it in their lives. It's a very strange thing, Very, very strange thing. Now, hands down, the thing that has beaten down love more than anything else, and one of the reasons that I think the simple people still have the best love relations, like my wife and her family, my nieces, my nephews, all the kids, all the young adults, is because they live in a natural environment and an unstructured environment, and most importantly, an environment not governed by systems that are not run by the Creator. And by run by the Creator, I mean a natural system, living in nature, a farm, something like that. Like I live here in the rainforest, you know, nature will heal anything. If you spend enough time in it, it will heal anything. And then the more structured and system governed a people are, the more absent love they will be. Okay? Very interesting the way it all works. You'll find that people who have a long career in the military have a very difficult time loving. They can survive a marriage and raise a family because it's a structured discipline, and they're very good at discipline and they're very good at structure. But they just sort of show up, which I guess 9 times out of 10 is enough. But they can't really invest the love there. They don't have it. People who go higher up in the world and gain more status, especially if they gain status in a system, they end up with huge love deficits, massive love deficits, you know? And for me, it seems as though every single thing I experienced in my life until I got here to this mountain was just another chapter of degradation in the book of life, my life. It's just one degrading experience, spiritually degrading spirit experience after another. The only time I was happy is when I was alone. And I have spent most of my life alone. If you take away the hours you sleep, because everybody is alone when they sleep. You may fall asleep with your husband or wife, but the moment you're asleep, you're alone. Right? So take away 8 hours a day and just stay with the remaining 16 hours. And I have probably spent more hours per year alone, meaning in a room, not talking to anybody, in an apartment or something like that. I have spent more time alone than probably anybody you know, including people who've taken up monastic life, whether it be a Buddhist or Christian or what have you. I have probably spent about 80% of my life alone, which is really good for a meditator. But I never left the world, really. I mean, until I came here to this mountain. And this is a kind of withdrawal from the world. But I'm in the last third of my life now. Okay? Last third of my life. And I want to get the most out of it. And I wouldn't be able to live up here without a companion, so I'm very glad to have a wife. I should also mention at this point that the woman that was given to me, the mate that was given to me this time, because I don't want to make it about gender, because this love absence happens to both men and women. Certain women will habitually choose men who just cannot love them. And certain men will habitually choose women who just cannot love them. And until you figure out what's going on, which is you're representing the love deficit you were raised with before you were 5 years old. So those are the only relationships you know and understand, are the ones with no love. Because that's how you lived, without love. Okay? Now, again, and this is a very important point, being denied love doesn't mean that you're necessarily in a cruel situation. It doesn't mean that you're being harmed in any way. It doesn't mean that you're being beaten or sexually abused or exposed to things a child shouldn't be exposed to. Doesn't mean any of those things. You can be in a loveless home. You can be born to a loveless family, and you have nice furniture. Your parents don't yell at you. You got a great TV. You get 50-60% of the stuff you ask for. I want a skateboard. Your parents go get you a skateboard. And you may say, hey, Bruce, isn't that love? It could be, but 99 times out of 100, it's duty, and it's the covering for the fact that you can't love. Okay? Because deep down, everybody knows the inability to love is a handicap more severe than blindness, deafness, or being a paraplegic in a wheelchair. The greatest handicap a human being can be born with is the inability to give and receive love in the human realm. Okay? That's it. I mean, you could be whipping around on a wheelchair, and if you have the heart open and you can give and receive love, your quality of life is better than 99% of the people who have their legs and who are not in a wheelchair. Love is everything. I can't stress this enough. It's what everybody is looking for. No matter what goal you're trying to achieve, ask yourself why you're trying to achieve that goal. Okay? Oh, I want to do this, this, and I want to open up this company and do this. Why? So you can make enough money to get a wife that you can love and who will love you, or get a husband who will love and look at the beauty race among women. Cosmetics are and female appearance are, I'd say, probably at this stage in human history, $1 trillion a year industry globally. Like, and why do women want to be attractive for men? Right? So they can be loved. They want to be loved. Why do men achieve? So they can find love. It's all about love at the end of the day, you know? And very few people learn to love beyond the immediate reproduction of themselves through children. Okay, which I guess you could say is a form of love, but very few people go beyond that. Very, very few people. And it is a sincere spiritual accomplishment to go beyond that. I write the books to love and be loved. Okay? It's that simple. Devil in Us, Light of Darkness, Stardust Ranch, God as an Economist. Everything I do is to love and be loved. And a lot of the theatrics I go through to love and be loved are so that I can prove to myself that I deserve it, because that's one of the deficits you carry forward from a love deficit before the age of 5. You're constantly trying to prove yourself worthy of being loved. You're constantly having this dialogue with your parents who could not express love. It's very simple. Very, very simple. I shouldn't say it's very simple, but once you get it, it's like, how did I not see that? But getting it is getting it, right? So when we get into some of the great writing in the human record, like the scriptures of various cultures, but in this instance, I'm thinking of one particular piece of scripture from the Bible, and it's where this gentleman named Manny, who used to be a carpenter, and they ended up calling him the Christ. He says, "What should it profit a man if he gain the whole world but lose his soul?" Well, this idea of, first of all, you can't lose your soul. It's not like it's not like the creator of time and space and every dimension sent this frail creature called a human being with its porcelain fragile ego into a hostile dualistic world and tucked a soul into the back pocket of his Levi's 501s and said, "Hey, don't lose this." That is one of the stupidest inversions in spirituality that is perpetuated by an untold number of stupid generations who've believed this. You can't lose your soul. You could have your astral body scalped, which is like a kind of, I say, a food. I mean, you can have your energy harvested, but you can't lose your soul, because you don't have a soul, you are soul. So the soul is obfuscated by the ego or the personality, which is the scab over the consciousness. And the personality is what heals the wounds that you have gained trying to feel love and being wounded. And that's how personality forms. The stronger the personality, the bigger the trauma. I offer witness exhibit A, the Jews. Okay, biggest egos in the world, biggest suitcase of trauma, and a lot of it's real, right? The pogroms in Russia, the Western European ostracization and contempt, the separation from public life until the Protestants really kick off in the 1500s. And there's just a lot of trauma there, constantly on the move, constantly being evicted from countries. And there's reasons for that. But it's not all of them. It's like a very small percentage ruining it for everybody, right? It's like everybody thinking every black person is walking around with a 9mm looking to shoot someone over $20, or scuffed Nike Jordan Air Jordans. It's just not the case. It's like 1 in 1,000 black men. And it's the same thing with the Jews. But there's your example right there. A lot of trauma in my family, and so we have very strong personalities in my family as well. Very interesting, the relationship between trauma and personality. So literally everything we do is to find love, and God is love. So the search for love is the search for God, and God is just a word. Sadhguru might say that you're looking to up your quotient of life, the quantity and quality of life in every moment you're living. That might be the purpose of Ayurvedic yoga. I don't think I'm misrepresenting Sadhguru there, and life would be a synonym for love in this regard. So, yeah, I put my coffee in thermoses back here. Very big. That's like I'm an iron worker in Brooklyn in the 50s. And so I find now, at 58, turning 59 in July, it's just in the last 3 or 4 years that I've just begun to get a handle on love. And I would say a lot of the spiritual work that I was doing, the meditation and the fasting and all the writing, that was just to stay alive, right? You don't often hear somebody confess that. But for me, I had such a deficit in my life that I had to do these things just to survive. And they did help me survive. And if I didn't develop a spiritual life at 17, 18, I don't think I'd be alive now. I'd be dead, or I'd be doing a life sentence in prison. I would not have had a normal life at all. And I see a lot of people going through the same thing now. And I guess what I want to close with is, the main theme of The Light of Darkness, which is institutional Satanism, and how these institutions are killing the human heart, you know, and especially like the people who go into the institutions, because you can't respond to your heart once you're in an institution. You have to follow protocol and regulations. You have to document everything you do. And if in that documentation a breach of protocol is discovered, then they'll fire you and you'll lose your pension. And for example, you can't be a nurse conscious of the fact that the medicine the government is forcing you to put into people's arms is killing them, is bad for them, is maiming them. You can't go into work with a case of saline solution in syringes and pretend you're doing your job. You can't act from your heart. Well, I already talked about this on my podcast with my Filipina friend in Toronto who's a nurse and is just conscious of the fact that she's killing people. And it's just tearing her up. So there's the institution, like just destroying her love, right? And you see this everywhere now. And this world they want to bring about, the World Economic Forum and all of this sort of stuff, this will completely disconnect us from love. And and that will be the end of the human race, because a human race that is not exploring, discovering, and expanding upon love in each and every human life will not be allowed to go on, because it violates the reason we were created. The people who go on to the dead loveless timeline, and there is a dead timeline in the human race. This split I talk about, one of the timelines leads to death and disintegration, and that will be done by slowly choking the love out of people. And the other one is going to give up all the institutions and all that stuff and return completely to love. Okay? It's really no more complicated than that. Anyways, there's my podcast on love, as promised and delivered. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.